Night lay thick over the Holloway property, a suffocating blanket of darkness pressing down upon the sagging fields and the groaning, frost-hunched house that had held generations of cruelty within its ribs. The sky above was a starless void, as if even the heavens refused to cast their gaze upon what would unfold before dawn. From the blackened tree-line, wind crept forward like a prowling animal, slipping through dead branches, carrying with it the scent of old soil and something colder, something that did not belong to the living. Inside, the Holloway house breathed. Its timbers flexed with long, arthritic complaints, its boards whispered where no feet moved, its plaster walls bulged where damp rot had eaten them hollow. The house had always seemed to brood, swollen with unsaid things, stained memories, and echoes that crawled in the bones of anyone who entered. Tonight, however, the air inside felt different, tight, charged, waiting. Elias Brant felt it too. He moved through the corridor on trembling legs, the torch clutched in his right hand sending thin ribbons of smoke upward to smear themselves against the warped ceiling. The torch was nothing more than a stripped pine branch stolen from the kitchen hearth an hour past, its head wrapped in burlap soaked in animal fat. The flame hissed and spat as he moved, as though nervous in his grip. He had rehearsed this moment for years. Or perhaps the house had rehearsed it for him. The Holloways had broken many things, bodies, wills, families, but Elias's memory had never yielded to their hands. He remembered every unjust blow, every winter with insufficient blankets, every chain mark on the arms of those who labored beside him, every child taken from their mother's arms before sunrise. These memories walked beside him now, whispering, urging. Still, his breath shuddered. Still, his feet quaked. Still, his heart felt like a trapped animal inside his chest. Above him, the Holloway family slept in their warm, quilted chambers. Charles, a man whose temper was as baleful as the hounds he kept chained behind the smokehouse, Mary Ann, whose delicate hands could turn cruel the moment fear crossed her face, and their two children, Lillian and Isaac, who wore the same cold indifference as their parents, though softened by youth. Their dreams floated obliviously behind their eyelids while Elias crept beneath them with a flame in hand. A floorboard sighed under his weight. The house seemed to exhale in response. Elias froze. He listened, head tilted, eyes narrowed. No footsteps above. No shift of fabric. Only the deep, rhythmic breathing of sleepers who believed themselves safe. He continued. The hallway stretched before him like the throat of some slumbering creature. The walls leaned inward as though eavesdropping, and the wallpaper, once cream and burgundy, had peeled into drooping, mold-licked tongues. His shadow quivered across these surfaces as he walked, disturbed by the torch's restless flame. At the end of the hallway yawned the parlor. A room that had seen laughter from the Holloways but suffering from those forced to maintain it. A room where Elias had scrubbed blood once, Charles's drunken accident, they claimed, though Elias suspected otherwise. A room where Mary Ann had broken plates during one of her fits and demanded the enslaved pick the shards from the rugs with bare fingers. A room heavy with memories that clung like soot. The velvet curtains hung limp on either side of the tall windows, frayed at their edges, dusty enough to exhale clouds when touched. Their dark red folds seemed to ripple slightly as Elias stepped toward them, the flame casting glints of dull gold along the threads. He halted inches away. The torch crackled. A droplet of molten fat slid down the stick, hissing where it landed on the wooden floor. Elias swallowed hard. His throat felt raw, scraped by unshed screams belonging to himself and others long dead. Here, at last, was the moment. The fire in his hand. The house around him. The sleepers above. The memories behind. The future, if he allowed himself to believe in one, a great yawning thing before him. He raised the torch. But the house murmured. A low, distant groan. A shift in its ancient bones. Almost as though it recognized the flame. Welcomed it. Invited it as a long-awaited guest. Elias felt the hairs along his arms rise in response. For a heartbeat, he wondered if the house knew more than he did, if it had been waiting decades for someone with enough buried rage to ignite it from within. His breath trembled out of him. His hand hovered. The flame danced inches from the velvet. And then, from the heavy darkness behind him, the air stirred, not by wind, not by breath, but by something subtler, the sensation of unseen eyes opening. He turned sharply. No one stood there. Only the empty hallway, sagging beneath the weight of shadows. Yet the feeling lingered, something old and watchful, something that had slumbered in the wood grain and the dust. He turned back to the curtains. The flame flickered, as though reaching. And finally, he pressed the torch to the fabric. The velvet inhaled fire with a quiet sigh, like a starving mouth receiving first sustenance in years. A shiver passed through the parlor, not from wind but from memory. If you, wanderer of dark tales, find yourself drawn deeper into this night, let your spirit subscribe, so the shadows know you walk beside them. The fire licked upward eagerly, climbing the curtain's length with greedy fingers. The cloth curled and blackened, shedding embers that tumbled like dying insects onto the rug below. Smoke rose in thin, twisting veins, spreading along the upper corners of the room. The scent was sharp, bitter, strangely sweet. Elias stepped back, torch lowered now but still burning. His heart pounded violently against his ribs. He half expected thunder to crack open the sky, or a scream to sound from upstairs, or some divine force to seize his wrists and wrench the torch away. But nothing happened. Nothing except the steady, rising hum of fire beginning its work. The house creaked again. Not in protest, no. In recognition. Elias withdrew further into the hallway. Sweat dampened his brow despite the cold night air. Shadows twitched along the walls as the fire behind him grew bolder, brighter. He could still extinguish it, he told himself. He could rush for the wash basin in the kitchen. He could shout. He could wake them. He could undo everything. But his legs did not move toward salvation. They carried him deeper into the corridor, away from the parlor's hungry glow. Upstairs, faintly, came the soft sigh of someone turning in sleep. A small tremor shook Elias's resolve. He felt both the enormity of what he had done and the inevitability of it. The Holloway house had never been a home. It was a carcass draped in legacy. A keepsake of cruelty. A monument to every injustice carved into the lives of those forced to serve it. Perhaps fire was the only language it understood. If the embers stir your breath as they stir his, leave a comment in the ashes, that the night may carry your whisper forward. The first pop of splitting wood echoed from the parlor. Elias flinched. The fire had found more than the curtains, it had reached the window frame, dry as old parchment, eager to feed. The flame spread its wings along the sill, casting long, wavering beams of orange through the crack in the doorway. Smoke drifted along the ceiling, gathering like storm clouds preparing to burst. Elias took another step backward. His fingers loosened around the torch. He needed to put it out before the dripping fat set the floor ablaze prematurely. He crouched and smothered it against the dirt-crusted flagstone near the pantry room, pressing until the flame sputtered and died with a final hiss. Above him, another sound, a faint cough. Isaac? Lillian? Marianne? He could not tell. His pulse quickened. He had known there would be noise, panic, confusion, cries, but hearing the first stirrings made his stomach coil. He glanced back toward the parlor. The doorway glowed like the mouth of an inferno. Shadows churned inside the room as the curtains withered into molten lace. The fire was alive now. And the house seemed to be waking with it. Elias's breath hitched as he looked up the staircase. It was steep, narrow, and crooked where time had warped it. The railing stood crooked like a broken spine. The flickering light from below threw the entire structure into eerie relief. Did he want to see their faces? Did he want them to see his? Did he want to witness their fear? Or avoid it entirely? His hands shook. The memories rose again, Lillian mocking the elderly enslaved for walking too slowly, Marianne's cold dismissal when a fever spread among the cabins, Charles's boot descending on Elias's ribs years ago while the man laughed. But even rage had a shadow, and Elias felt both watching him now. He took one step toward the staircase, then stopped as the fire behind him roared through a larger beam, filling the hallway with a deep, throaty boom. If your pulse follows the crack of burning timber, let it be known with a subscribe, so the flames may mark your passage in the dark. Smoke surged outward, darkening the ceiling. Sparks drifted like fireflies. Elias staggered back again, coughing into the crook of his arm. The heat had strengthened, no longer a gentle warmth but a blistering breath against his skin. He turned, instinctively seeking a way to move away from the rising inferno. His feet carried him toward the back of the house, past the narrow servants' quarters and toward the storeroom where the walls bowed inward like a dying animal. Each step made the floor moan beneath his boots. The house seemed to tremble, faintly, subtly, as if anticipating what came next. Another cough sounded upstairs, louder this time. Then a woman's voice murmured in confusion. Marianne. Elias froze in place. He heard her shift, the faint rustle of blankets. Another cough. And then the unmistakable scrape of a bedpost against the floorboards. The Holloways would wake soon. He felt an unexpected surge of dread, not for them, but for himself. Would he be trapped? Would he choke before the flames reached him? Would the house, in its bitter final moments, choose to keep him as well? And beneath those fears lurked a haunting question he had never dared acknowledge. Was this righteous? Or monstrous? The silence after that question felt colder than the winter wind. Elias braced a hand against the wall. The plaster crumbled beneath his touch, shedding chalky flecks onto his skin. The house's very bones felt fragile now, as if his flame had snapped something deep inside it, something that kept centuries of sins dormant. He heard a child cry out. Isaac, frightened by smoke or dream or both. Elias's breath stuttered. The fire crackled behind him like cruel applause. He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead to the cool wall. The guilt was sudden, crushing, violent in its weight. He had not anticipated this moment, had not anticipated the human sounds of waking fear. It struck him with more force than any of Charles Holloway's blows ever had. But the alternative, the continuation of life under this roof, this legacy, this rot, tightened around his throat like rope. He lifted his head. Through the crack at the bottom of the parlor doorway, flames spilled outward, dragon-like, devouring the edges of the rug. Smoke began pushing into the hall in earnest now, rolling with a relentless hunger. Upstairs, footsteps sounded. Rapid. Uncertain. Small. Lillian. Elias swallowed hard. He did not know if he should run or hide or turn back toward the parlor and embrace the fire he had birthed. Instead, he stood motionless in the corridor, trembling, listening as the Holloway house began its long, agonizing reckoning. The fire howled. The walls buckled. The sins whispered. And dawn remained impossibly far away. The night was only beginning. The Holloway house shuddered as the flames claimed their first true victory. What began as the timid flicker of burning velvet now surged into a ravenous blaze that clawed its way along the parlor walls. Heat bellowed outward in waves, distorting the air, trembling the floorboards, loosening decades of dust that drifted upward in choking clouds. The parlor windows glowed orange, their panes sweating and warping as if the glass itself recoiled from what burned behind it. Elias Brant stood midway down the corridor, breath ragged, sweat rolling down his temples. His soot-smeared fingers clenched the remnants of the extinguished torch. The smoke curling through the hallway smelled of charred cloth, old varnish, and something older, something metallic and bitter, like the scent that lingers after a wound. Behind him, a beam cracked sharply. The sound shot through the silence like a gunshot. Upstairs, someone gasped. The Holloway family was awake. Elias's pulse surged. His lungs strained against the thickening air. Panic pressed against his ribs with clawed hands. But deeper than panic, beneath the fear of being discovered, beneath the terror of dying in the inferno he had created, was another feeling. A hollow, aching inevitability. The fire had begun a chain of events that could not be undone, no matter how desperately his breath trembled or his hands shook. The house, long starved of justice, had finally tasted flame. And it wanted more. If you dare follow the fire's first breath, subscribe, so the night may know your footsteps as it closes around this burning house. Mary Ann Holloway coughed above, a thin, frightened sound. Her slippers shuffled on the creaking boards of the second-floor hallway. Isaac whimpered, a child's small voice swallowed by smoke. Lillian cried out suddenly, sharp, panicked, followed by the thud of feet hitting the floor. The family moved like blind things inside a labyrinth filling with poison. Elias breathed shallowly, listening. A low moan came from the house itself, a long, wavering rumble that traveled through the walls like distant thunder. The fire had reached something structural, one of the supporting beams, perhaps. The entire frame trembled faintly, as though awakening from a slumber decades deep. The parlor flames spread fast. Too fast. Elias stepped backward, pressing a hand against the hallway's peeling wallpaper to steady himself. The wallpaper felt warm, dangerously so. He imagined the fire crawling behind it, slithering upward through hollow spaces in the walls like a serpent made of smoke and hunger. Another crack rang out. A chunk of ceiling plaster fell near his feet, bursting into powder. He coughed violently, doubling over for a moment. The smoke thickened into a gray veil. It rolled along the hallway ceiling, spilling downward like the tide from some unseen ocean. The house was no longer merely on fire. It was breathing fire. Elias forced himself upright. He had to move. He turned toward the back of the house, near the narrow stairwell leading to the storage rooms and root cellar. He managed only 2 steps before he heard Charles Holloway shout from upstairs. "Mary Ann, get the children. Something's burning." Elias froze. The tone of Charles's voice, a mixture of fury and dread, struck Elias like a blow. For years that voice had commanded, cursed, demanded, punished. Hearing it now, sharpened by fear rather than anger, twisted a knot inside Elias's stomach. Part of him wanted to flee the house entirely. Another part, buried deep, lit by something darker than fear, wanted to hear Charles cough in the thick smoke he himself had created. The floor above shook as Charles stomped toward the stairs. Isaac cried out again, this time louder. Lillian coughed until her voice cracked. The family scrambled like trapped animals. Elias clenched his jaw. He moved. Not toward the door. Not toward escape. But deeper into the house, down the back hall, where the smoke gathered in sluggish swirls, where the boards groaned under both his weight and the rising temperature. The Holloway house felt alive around him. Each breath of fire made its timbers shift. Each gust of heat made its hinges creak. The walls, swollen with decades of damp and neglect, seemed to pulse like flesh under flame. Elias stumbled as the floor pitched slightly beneath him. The house was tilting, settling, as heat warped its foundation. He reached the narrow doorway leading into the rear passage, only to hear another burst of sound from upstairs, Mary Ann's shrill voice crying, "Charles, the hall is full of smoke, help me. Isaac can't breathe." Elias's hand hovered on the doorframe. His chest tightened. He did not want to hear their suffering. Yet the house forced him to. Every sound carried clearly through the choking air, sharpened by fear, amplified by the emptiness of these long, oppressive corridors. The parlor roared again. A wave of heat hit Elias's back, almost pushing him forward. He pressed further down the hall. "If the smoke stings your eyes and the fear grips your throat, leave a comment," whispered like a prayer lost in the rising ash. The hall narrowed until the ceiling stooped low overhead. Elias ducked slightly as he moved, his shoulders brushing the splintered walls. The boards here were old, unpolished, and warped with moisture collected over brutal winters. Now they steamed faintly, sweating beneath the rising temperature. A gust of heat rolled down the corridor like the exhale of some waking beast. Elias stumbled into the small storage alcove. It was barely more than a hollow room with shelves bowed under sacks of stale grain, jars of cloudy preserves, and tools rusted by neglect. A thin window, more cracked than pane, let in a narrow strip of moonlight. Elias leaned against the wall, feeling the cold air from the crack brush his cheek. It was the only coolness left in the house. But he couldn't stay long. Smoke coiled in behind him, pushing into the alcove, whining through the narrow doorway like a trapped spirit seeking escape. He turned back toward the hall, eyes watering fiercely. Through the smoke, flames flared at the far end, small at first, then licking greedily along the baseboards as though pursuing him. The fire was spreading with unnatural speed. The Holloway house was old, too dry, too wounded by decades of neglect. It burned as if eager to be cleansed of its memories. Elias forced a breath. He had to reach the back door. He had to escape before the house collapsed on top of him. But just as he pushed away from the wall, a sound froze him in place. Footsteps. Slamming, staggering footsteps. Elias spun toward the hall. Charles Holloway appeared at the far end, framed by smoke and flickering orange light. His nightshirt clung to his sweat-soaked chest. His hair stuck wildly to his forehead. His eyes, red and furious, locked onto Elias. "There!" Charles barked, voice shredded by smoke. "You, what have you?" His question fell into a fit of coughing. He braced himself on the wall, shoulders shaking. Elias backed up instinctively. Charles stumbled forward, half blind, half choking, but fueled by the same rage that had governed his life. A beam collapsed somewhere behind him with a thunderous crack. Charles flinched but staggered onward. "Get the children," he rasped, though Elias could not tell if the order was meant for himself or for Elias, or if Charles was speaking to a ghost of authority he no longer held. Elias stepped further into the alcove. Charles lunged. Only the sudden buckling of the floor saved Elias. A section of boards near Charles's feet dipped violently as the fire chewed through the support beams beneath. Charles pitched sideways, slamming into the wall with a cry. Elias didn't wait. He turned and bolted deeper toward the rear exit, smoke scalding his throat with every desperate breath. If you run with Elias through this burning labyrinth, subscribe, so the night remembers the echo of your feet as the house begins to fall. The hallway leading to the back door swam in shifting light. Flames crept along the ceiling like fiery vines. Soot snowed from above, coating Elias's hair and shoulders. Every inhale scraped like broken glass through his chest. He reached the final doorway, but the frame was warped from heat, the wood swollen outward, resisting. He shoved his shoulder into it. The door groaned but did not give. He tried again, harder this time, muscles trembling. Behind him, another explosion of heat surged as the fire found the oil lamp shelf near the parlor. Glass shattered. Burning oil streamed across the hallway floor like molten amber. Elias slammed his shoulder into the door once more. It cracked. A thin sliver of cold night air kissed his cheek. He pushed again, and the door burst outward, sending Elias stumbling into the frigid darkness of the back porch. The night swallowed him whole. Cold air rushed into his lungs like knives. He gasped, falling to one knee, gripping the porch rail as his vision spun. Behind him, the house's flames roared out of the door like breath from a dragon's throat. But even as he collapsed on the porch, coughing violently, Elias did not feel relief. Because through the open doorway, the Holloway house groaned again, louder, deeper, almost anguished. It was the sound of a structure in torment. Or perhaps a creature dying. Or perhaps something else waking within its burning bones. Elias staggered back to his feet, gripping the railing. Behind him, the windows on the second floor glowed like furious eyes. Shadows writhed in the glass. Someone, screamed inside. Elias could not tell if it was Marianne. Or Lillian. Or the house itself. He backed away from the porch, unable to look away, unable to breathe without pain. The night wind carried embers into the field like falling stars. The Holloway house burned. And yet somehow, it still seemed to breathe. The flames reached upward like hands begging the heavens for witness. And the heavens, as always over the Holloway land, offered none. If your spirit has not fled this burning threshold, leave a comment, that the ash may whisper your name. Elias Brant had imagined this moment so many times that the memory of the fantasies felt older than he was. In the dead heat of summer nights, while chained in the wash shed, he would close his eyes and picture the Holloway house in flames, timbers snapping, windows bursting, the great proud columns collapsing like kneeling giants. He imagined the screams, the chaos, the sudden justice that would sweep through the world like a cleansing wind. But imagination is clean. Reality was not. Reality trembled in his hands. The torch spat tiny embers that drifted downward like dying fireflies. The velvet curtains loomed before him, dark, heavy, almost breathing, and Elias felt the house sway with a long, ancient sigh, as if the structure itself sensed him and leaned closer to listen. The fire wanted to live. Elias could feel it. It whispered at the end of the torch. Now. Now. Let me eat. But something in him resisted. Not fear, no, Elias Brant had lived too many years beneath the Holloway lash to fear anything left on this earth. This hesitation was something stranger. Something older. Something the Holloway house itself stirred awake. A memory took him by the throat. He saw Mrs. Laurel Holloway leaning over him when he was only 6 years old, her perfume sickly sweet, her smile thin as a razor. He remembered how she'd whispered, after his mother collapsed in the fields. If you ever think of running, I will send dogs for every drop of blood that came from her, boy. Dogs. He still heard their barking in his dreams. He lowered the torch slightly, just an inch, and felt the fire recoil as if offended. The house creaked behind him. A croak like an old voice clearing its throat. Elias froze. He turned, breath tight, eyes sweeping the parlor's doorway. Shadows crawled up the wallpaper in slow ripples as the wind found some crack in the siding and drifted across the room. Nothing. And yet. Something shifted above. A faint thud. Then another. A dragging sound. Someone awake. Or merely the house shifting under its own rot. He didn't know. But the air felt suddenly thicker, as if saturated with breath. Elias raised the torch again, its flame swirling, frantic. The curtains were dry, old, faded. A few threads dangled like veins cut open. He could already picture how they would burn. Fire would race up them in seconds, swallowing them whole. The blaze would leap to the wallpaper. To the floor. To the staircase. And then to the Holloways, sleeping so comfortably in the rooms above. His heart pounded like hooves in his chest. Elias swallowed once, hard, and lifted the torch until it hovered inches from the velvet. The heat licked the air. The flame leaned toward the cloth like a starving mouth. Upstairs, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Measured. One step. Another. Another. Elias stiffened. Someone was moving deliberately, not half asleep, not confused, awake. His breath quivered. The torch dipped slightly. The house's walls seemed to contract with him, drawing inward, pressing closer, like ribs tightening around a heart. He turned his head upward, listening so sharply his ears rang. Another step. And then. A whisper. Barely audible. Barely human. Elias. He felt his spine ice over. No one awake should know he was here. No one should know his name. Elias. The voice came again, this time slithering down the staircase like cold fingers. A woman's voice. Soft, almost coaxing. Mrs. Laurel Holloway. No. Her voice carried cruelty like perfume. This one carried nothing but hunger. The torch sputtered as Elias's grip trembled. He took one step back from the curtains. The voice came again, gentler. Elias. I see you. His lungs seemed to stop working. Is this the house? He'd heard men whisper of places where spirits lived in the floorboards, in the nails, in the beams soaked with years of blood. Was this one such place? He felt the eyes of the walls on him. The floorboards beneath his feet seemed to shift, as if breath pushed upward from beneath. The shadows deepened, curling tighter around the edges of the room. Elias, the whisper slid so close to his ear he flinched. He spun, torch raised defensively, but no one was behind him. The parlor was empty. Only the firelight moved. Elias. A new voice, this one deep, masculine, familiar. He jerked toward the staircase. Mr. Amos Holloway. No. No human voice came from that direction now. Only darkness. He heard the masculine voice again, but closer, behind him. He turned. And saw movement in the far corner of the parlor. A shape. Low to the ground. Dragging. At first, it looked like a sack someone had left behind. Then it twitched. Elias choked back a sound. The shape crawled forward into the weak torchlight. It was a cradle. One of the old nursery ones. The kind used decades ago. Its wooden runners scraped the floorboards as it rocked itself forward, inch by inch. Rock. Drag, rock, drag. Empty. Broken. But moving with purpose. Elias stumbled backward, nearly dropping the torch. The cradle paused. Tilted. As if staring at him. Then it rocked once, violently, slamming its side into the wooden floor. Bang. Once more. Bang. Elias's breath grew ragged. He glanced at the staircase, no footsteps now. No whisper. Just this thing. This impossible, crawling thing. The cradle rocked backward, then thrust itself hard toward him, scraping a shrill, splintering cry along the floorboards. Elias backed toward the curtains again, the torch wavering. Stay back, he hissed, voice cracking. The nursery cradle paused. Its shadow spilled across the parlor floor like an ink stain, stretching longer, wider, far too wide to be cast by such a small object. The house groaned deeply, as if something enormous shifted in its belly. Then. A baby's cry. High. Thin. Echoing down the hall. Elias flinched again. His heart began to thrash inside him. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, ain't no babies left in this house. Not in years. The house answered with another wail. Longer this time. Closer. The cradle jerked an inch. Elias raised the torch in defense, the flame flaring. I ain't afraid of you, he breathed. You hear me? I ain't afraid. But his voice betrayed him, trembling slightly on the last word. He could feel the fire begging for release. Let me go. Let me burn. Let me end this. His hands shook violently. He turned toward the curtains again, desperate now. He would burn the house before it could bring more horrors to life. He pressed the torch closer. Heat curled from the flame. The velvet fibers quivered. Just a breath away. He inhaled, and held it, ready to ignite the night and everything inside it. When the house spoke behind him, in a single chorus of whispered voices, male, female, child, old, overlapping like a choir of the dead. Elias Brant, don't you dare leave us in the dark. His body locked. The flame wavered. The cradle stopped moving entirely. Silence fell so thick he could hear the spit sizzling on the edge of the torch. Then, footsteps thundered on the floor above. Not slow anymore. Not hesitant. Someone was running. No, multiple someones. They were awake. Fully awake. And they were coming. Elias's breath snapped back into his lungs. He thrust the torch toward the curtains. And then froze. Because the curtains moved. Not by fire. Not by wind. They pulled slightly upward. Self-tightening. Drawing themselves away from the flame. As if the house did not want to burn. Not yet. Not now. As if the house wanted to keep its secrets. Or him. Elias, a voice roared from upstairs now, human, furious, unmistakable. Amos Holloway. The master. Awake. Elias's time had run out. The torch sputtered wildly in his grasp as he stood caught between two horrors. The living above, and whatever watched him from the shadows below. Behind him, the cradle rocked slowly again. Once. Twice. As if encouraging him forward. The house waited. The family descended. The flame quivered. And Elias Brant, standing in the breathless heart of the Holloway house, understood the truth. The first spark was never his alone. Something else lived in these walls. Something that remembered every cruelty. Something that hungered for its own kind of reckoning. But it did not want him to start the fire. It wanted him to witness it. The footsteps upstairs grew louder. The house seemed to inhale. And Elias tightened his grip on the torch. Unsure whether he was about to burn the Holloways. Or if the Holloway house was about to burn itself. The first boom of footsteps hitting the staircase snapped through the Holloway house like gunfire. Elias Brant flinched, gripping the torch hard enough to splinter the wooden handle. His breath came shallow, sharp, every inhale burning his chest. He'd always believed the Holloways would die by his hand one day, yet now, standing in the parlor with shadows whispering and furniture shifting like living bone, he wasn't so certain the decision belonged to him anymore. The cradle rocked slowly in the far corner, its wooden wheels tapping in a steady rhythm. Tap. 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 Like a heartbeat that did not belong to any living child. Elias forced himself to turn away from it, but its motion scraped against his ears like a whisper begging to be acknowledged. Upstairs, Amos Holloway barked a command, sharp, furious. "Who's down there? You hear me? Who's in my house?" His voice rattled dust from the beams. A match struck. A lamp flared. Light seeped between the banister rails. They were coming. The torch trembled in Elias's hand as he pressed its flame once more toward the curtains, but the velvet again recoiled, curling away like frightened flesh. "Burn," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Just burn, damn you." But the fabric kept pulling back, resisting him, refusing the fire. It was as if invisible hands gathered it tightly, safeguarding it. That's when Elias felt the truth press cold against the back of his neck. This house is not on your side. Nothing here is on your side. Except maybe the fire, but even that wavered, responding to something else in the room. He swallowed and stepped backward, away from the stubborn curtains, away from the cradle, away from the corners where the air thickened into almost shapes. He wasn't running. Not yet. But he was beginning to realize he was standing in a place that didn't want him alive, didn't want him dead, just wanted him here. Held. Witness. Participant. Another roar from upstairs. "Laurel. Bring me my shotgun." Mrs. Laurel's shrill reply echoed down the hallway. "Whoever it is won't make it out." Elias felt the house tighten around him. The temperature dropped. A coldness seeped from the floorboards like winter breath. He could see his exhale in thin gray wisps. The torch sputtered an angry hiss. Then. A soft creak behind him. Not from the cradle. Not from the stairs. From directly behind his left shoulder. He froze. Something was standing there. He didn't turn. Couldn't. His muscles locked from neck to heel. He felt breath brush his ear. Not warm. Not cold. Just there. A whisper slid into him like a needle. Elias Brant, don't fear the Holloways. Fear their house. His legs nearly collapsed. He twisted around, torch raised. Nothing. Just the wallpaper peeling like dead skin. Just the parlor rug swollen with old stains. Just the emptiness that pulsed with unseen movement. Elias staggered backward until his spine hit the wall. Above him, a floorboard groaned under heavy boots. Amos Holloway snarled. Stay behind me, Laurel. If it's one of them, I'll put him in the ground myself. Elias's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what one of them meant. He gripped the torch tighter. Now the house's silence broke like a snapped neck. A door slammed upstairs. A woman screamed, Laurel Holloway, not in fear, but in outrage. The nursery. Elias's blood iced. The nursery. Where the cradle came from. Where the house had just whispered to him. Laurel's voice cracked into a shrill, trembling shriek. Amos, it's open, the door is open. A pause. A long, breathless pause. Then Amos shouted, voice shaking despite his bravado. Who opened it? No answer. Not from Laurel. Not from the floorboards. Not from any living thing. Elias felt the parlor darken around him as if the shadows inhaled. Then the cradle began to move again. Not rocking. Sliding. It scraped across the wood, turning slowly, so painfully slowly, until its empty hollow faced the staircase. As if waiting. As if greeting. As if remembering the last Holloway child it ever held and the silent death that followed. Elias's hands went clammy around the torch. The footsteps on the stairs stopped. He could picture Amos and Laurel standing at the landing, staring down at the parlor with the lamplight shaking in Amos's fist. Then Laurel gasped. A quick, sharp intake of breath that didn't sound entirely human. Elias dared to look up toward the staircase. What he saw turned his pulse to gravel. A face stared down at him. Not Amos. Not Laurel. A child. But not living. A small girl leaned through the spaces in the banister, her head tilted so far her ear nearly brushed her shoulder. One eye open. One eye swollen shut. Hair damp and stringy, clinging to her cheeks. Her nightgown stained dark at the collar. She watched him with soft, awful patience. Elias staggered. The torch sputtered with his fear. The child lifted one hand. A small hand. Broken fingers. And pointed at him. Laurel Holloway screamed, a raw, guttural sound Elias had never heard any human make. Amos choked out. Elizabeth? No, no, she died, she died. The little girl smiled, though one side of her mouth barely moved. Elias stepped back. But the house stepped with him. The banister rails groaned. A painting on the wall slid an inch downward. The chandelier swayed though there was no wind. Laurel sobbed in hysterical bursts. Amos, Amos, do you see her? Do you see? Shut up, Laurel. Amos shouted, voice cracking. It's a trick, it's. The girl moved her hand again, not pointing now. Reaching. Reaching toward the torch. Elias felt heat flare up his arm. The flame leapt higher, twisting, snapping, almost gleeful. A realization crushed down on him. The house wants fire. It wants it now. But it doesn't want me choosing where. The little girl's voice rose, soft as a dying breath. Burn us or join us. Laurel shrieked. Amos fired the shotgun, the blast thunderous, deafening, but the shot shattered only plaster and shadow. The girl remained, smiling that crooked, impossible smile. Elias felt the fire twist toward her. He lunged backward, turning away, trying to control it. But the flame extended itself like a reaching limb. It flicked. It bent. It chose. A spark leapt from the torch, not toward the curtains, but toward the staircase. Landing on the fraying carpet runner. The fabric smoldered. Then glowed. Then burst upward with a roar. Laurel's scream tore through the halls. Amos dropped his lamp, it shattered into an explosion of oil and fire. Flames raced along the banister, up the walls, devouring the dry wallpaper in seconds. Elias stumbled, coughing as smoke bloomed around him. The girl on the landing watched, unmoving, as the flames curled around her feet but did not touch her. She simply stared at him through the rising fire. Her voice reached him through the crackle, steady and strangely calm. Now we all burn together. The house exhaled with a long, shuddering breath. Then every door upstairs slammed at once. Every window shutter clapped shut. The parlor floor buckled beneath Elias's boots. The Holloway house had opened its eyes. And chosen its night. The collapse began with a sound like a great wooden beast gasping its final breath. Elias Brant lurched forward as the staircase groaned, arched, then split down the center with a violent crack. Fire shot through the wound like blood from a fresh vein. Burning wood rained onto the parlor floor, scattering sparks across the rug and igniting new trails of flame that slithered hungrily toward him. Behind the firestorm, Amos Holloway howled, rage drowned beneath fear. Laurel! Move, move! But Laurel's reply was nothing human. Her sobs had become shrill, frantic, a trembling hysteria that broke into choking coughs. She wasn't crying for salvation. She was crying as though realizing something unspeakable, that the house itself had always known their names, their sins, their cruelties, and now wanted its payment in flesh. Elias's torch flickered violently as the air thickened with heat. Smoke curled around him like arms dragging him backward. He stumbled across the parlor, boots slipping on embers that clung to the floorboards like burning insects. A picture frame fell from the wall and shattered beside him, a portrait of Amos's father, stern-eyed and severe. The painted face caught fire at once, the flames chewing through the oil and canvas until the features warped into a snarling grimace. The house was devouring its history. Scraping it clean. Leaving nothing whole. Elias brushed past a smoldering bookshelf, coughing so hard his ribs ached. He could feel his heartbeat thundering against his sternum like fists pounding on a locked door. He tried not to look back toward the staircase. But the house forced him. With a groan deep as thunder, the top landing buckled. Amos Holloway stumbled into view, silhouetted against the blaze. His shirt sleeves were burning. He slapped at them, screaming. Laurel clung to the railing beside him, her nightdress glowing from the nearby flames. Sweat and soot streaked her cheeks, and her eyes were wide, too wide, as though she saw more than fire devouring her home. She stared at the parlor. At Elias. Her lips parted. But she didn't scream for help. She whispered, hoarse and trembling. It called our Elizabeth back, you brought her to us. Elias felt the words pierce him with a cold sharper than any blade. He shook his head. I ain't brought. A loud crack tore through the air. The ceiling began to sag. White-hot embers rained down like falling stars gone feral. Amos grabbed Laurel's wrist. We have to get out. Laurel's knees buckled, and for a brief moment, just a flicker, Elias saw her face change. Not soften. Not warp. But reveal something long buried, a fright that had nothing to do with fire. A fright that had lived inside her before tonight. She yanked her arm away from Amos. No, she rasped, backing up the stairs. No, it's her. She's in here. Don't you hear her?" Amos didn't have time to answer. The nursery door at the end of the hall slammed open violently. The bang echoed like a pistol shot. A gust of cold swept out, a cold that did not belong to any ordinary night. Elias stiffened. He could feel her before he saw anything. The Holloway child. Eliza Holloway. The girl who'd appeared on the landing moments earlier. A child who had died years before. A child the family never spoke of except in whispers behind locked doors. The flames parted for her. As though the inferno itself feared her small, crooked form. She drifted into view, head tilted, one eye swollen shut, the other watching Elias with a softness that chilled his marrow. Laurel collapsed against the railing, sobbing. "Eliza, forgive us, forgive me." Amos shouted, voice breaking, "Laurel, get away from her." Elias backed toward the west hallway, torch shaking as the flames licked dangerously close. But the child didn't move toward him. She raised her hand, the broken fingers trembling, and pointed at something above him. Elias instinctively ducked, just as a burning beam fell with a roar. The impact shook the entire house. Heat flared so violently it singed Elias's eyebrows. The torch went out. Darkness swallowed him except for the glow of flames spreading along the floor. His throat tightened, choking on smoke so thick it scraped down to his lungs. He stumbled blindly, hands dragging along walls that burned his palms. He needed a door. A window. Any path out before the house swallowed him whole. But every doorway he reached seemed to shrink, as though the hallways were bending, tightening, shifting shape around him. The Holloway house was closing its fist. He forced himself into the west corridor, stumbling over a collapsed chair, shoulder smashing into the wall. The wallpaper, once floral, peeled upward, bulging like blisters ready to burst. The firestorm behind him roared like a wild animal. He didn't dare look back again. Halfway down the corridor, the floor tilted beneath him, pitching him forward. He caught himself on a side table, knocking over a cracked silver candlestick. It rolled across the boards, glowing red from the heat. The house groaned deeply. As though laughing. As though sealing his fate. He reached the far door and shoved his shoulder against it, but it wouldn't budge. The knob seared his palm. The heat on the other side told him this room was already gone. He turned, chest heaving. There was no escape this way. The only path was back toward the main hall, toward the fire, toward the child, toward the Holloways. He clenched his shaking fists. He had started this. But something else had taken hold of it. Stolen it. Warped it. He wasn't in control. Not anymore. A deep crack split through the floorboards. Smoke curled upward in a slow serpent, and from the black gap came the unmistakable sound of something breathing. Something beneath the house. Something long buried. Elias stumbled backward. That was when a low whisper drifted through the corridor, as if carried by ash. If this tale chills your soul, wanderer, whisper your thoughts into the dark. Subscribe your name to the fire. Let your comment linger among the members. The voice faded like a dying ember, but its echo crawled along the walls. Elias's heart hammered. He didn't know who, or what, had spoken. He didn't want to. The floor lurched again, throwing him against the wall. The boards beneath his boots splintered, then snapped inward. A ball of fire burst upward, forcing him to stagger back into the hallway's orange haze. He pressed his sleeve to his mouth, coughing, stumbling toward the main hall. The fire had grown monstrous. Flames leapt from wall to wall, licking the ceiling, turning everything red. Dust glowed like drifting ash clouds. Furniture collapsed into blackened skeletons. And in the center of the hall stood Amos Holloway. His shirt half-burned. His hair singed. Face smeared with soot and terror. He held the shotgun in shaking hands, eyes fixed on the child ghost standing only a few feet away. "Get back," he shouted, voice raw. The child did not move. Amos's hands quivered so violently Elias could hear the clatter of metal. "You ain't real," Amos choked. "You ain't, you can't be." Eliza Holloway raised her head. Her voice drifted out like a dying wind. "You left me." Laurel's sobs echoed from behind the banister. "You left me in the dark," the child whispered. Amos fired. The blast split the air. But the smoke swallowed the bullet. The girl didn't flinch. She took one step forward. Laurel screamed. Amos stumbled back, slipping on the burning carpet. Elias watched in stunned horror. The heat was unbearable now. He could feel fire crawling up the hallway walls behind him, closing the distance. He had seconds left. Eliza reached out with her broken hand, and Amos Holloway froze as if something invisible had closed around his throat. He clawed at the air, gasping, face turning a sickly red. Laurel shrieked, scrambling down a few steps toward him. "Amos! Amos!" But fire exploded along the stairs, forcing her back, flames tearing her nightdress, biting at her hair. Elias stumbled forward, shouting over the roar. "Let him go." The child turned her one good eye toward Elias. Silence fell. Not the silence of a quiet room. The silence of a grave. The child's head tilted. And she whispered. "You lit the spark. I only finish it." The flames surged, crawling up the walls like 1,000 grasping hands. Amos Holloway dropped the shotgun. His knees buckled. And everything happened at once. The ceiling cracked open. A burning beam plummeted. Laurel shrieked. Elias lunged backward. The hall filled with living fire. And the Holloway house screamed as it began to collapse inward, devouring its family, and the man who had ignited its awakening. The night outside the Holloway property was unnaturally still, as though even the insects refused to bear witness. The sky glowed a dull, throbbing red where flames clawed at the darkness, casting the fields in an eerie, blood-colored haze. The Holloway house, once a proud structure of timber and plaster, now writhed like a dying animal, every beam collapsing inward, every window vomiting fire, every board screaming beneath the weight of its own undoing. Elias Brant crawled through a gap where the west wall had bowed outward, his arms trembling, his breath ragged. Smoke curled out of his mouth each time he exhaled, as though the fire had seeped into him and taken residence in his lungs. He collapsed onto the cold dirt. His hands shook so violently he barely recognized them as his own. Blisters had formed along his palms, angry and raw. Soot coated his hair, his clothes, his skin, turning him into a creature carved from char. Behind him, the house groaned, one final long, shuddering exhale. Then a section of the roof fell inward with a thunderous crash. Sparks erupted like a swarm of fireflies, swirling upward before fading into the night. Elias flinched but did not rise. He lay there, coughing, retching, staring at the burning ruins with eyes full of horror, and something deeper. Something he did not dare name. A sharp crack split the night. Another beam gave way. More flames surged. But the house did not fall evenly. Not naturally. It twisted, folding inward like a fist closing around a secret. Elias pushed himself upright, swaying. His body felt carved from bruises and ash, but he forced himself to his knees, then to his feet. The fire painted the world around him a violent gold, every flicker revealing the field's dead grass and the silent tree-line beyond. No wind stirred. No owl cried. No night creature dared enter the glow. For a long moment, Elias simply watched. Inside those flames, shapes writhed, some he knew were illusions born of heat and terror. But others held form too long. Moved too purposefully. Stared out through the shattered windows with too much recognition. Laurel Holloway's scream suddenly tore through the night, muffled by collapsing timbers. A moment later, a second voice rose, hoarse, desperate, unmistakably Amos's. Their cries twisted together, distorted by the fire, until they sounded like part of the house itself. Elias stumbled backward. He should have run. Any man would have. But his legs would not obey. His heart would not release him. Something held him staring, as though the fire had placed a hand on his shoulder and commanded him to witness what came next. A section of the second floor caved inward. Through the opening, Elias glimpsed something impossible, a small figure standing perfectly still amid the inferno. A little girl in a nightgown, one eye swollen shut, hair clinging to her face like wet threads. Eliza Holloway. Her body charred. Her form flickering. But her eye, her one good eye, glowed with cold intelligence. She tilted her head toward Elias. And smiled. Elias staggered back, nearly falling. His heart lurched painfully in his chest. The ghost child did not move, did not speak, did not pursue, but she watched him. As though waiting for him to understand something. Then the flames swallowed her, closing like jaws. The house roared. The ground trembled. The final collapse came like thunder. The Holloway house fell inward, sinking into itself until only the stone foundation remained visible beneath the heap of burning ruin. Elias shielded his face from the burst of heat. A shower of embers rained down, drifting like fiery snowflakes. The blaze surged one last time, reaching desperately toward the sky, before settling into a steady, merciless burn. The night grew quiet again. Too quiet. Elias's breath shook. His lungs ached. Every heartbeat felt stolen. He turned away, forcing steps across the yard. The grass crunched beneath his boots, stiff from frost where the fire's reach had not yet touched. As he limped toward the tree lean, a faint rustle came from somewhere behind him. He froze. Not from the direction of the collapsing house. From the ground. From the soil itself. Elias turned slowly. At the edge of the ruin, ash drifted in thick gray sheets. Beneath it, something dark jutted from the earth, small, square, partially scorched. A box. No bigger than a child's toy chest. The flames had not consumed it. Elias stared. His chest tightened. His instincts screamed for him to flee. But the box pulsed softly, as though something inside it breathed. The air around it shimmered, bending heat into unnatural shapes. He took a trembling step toward it. Inside the ruin, a whisper curled through the smoke, soft and cold. You lit the spark, but you were never the first flame. Elias spun around, but the voice was gone. Only the crackle of dying fire answered him. He forced himself closer to the box. Each step sank his boots into ash. Each inhale seared his lungs. He reached the object, crouched, and brushed soot from its lid. A small nameplate gleamed faintly. He wiped it with his sleeve. Eliza Holloway 1839–1844. Elias recoiled. A child's keepsake chest. Built long before tonight. Hidden beneath the house. Buried with her secrets. His hands shook violently as he touched the latch. It clicked open with no resistance. Inside lay a bundle of charred cloth, small, delicate, barely holding form. A child's nightgown. Beneath it, a lock of hair tied with a faded ribbon. And under that, brittle parchment stained with something dark. He lifted the paper. Words written in Laurel Holloway's unmistakable hand. We must never speak of what Amos did. We must bury her beneath the house. Let her stay quiet. Let her stay forgotten. Elias's stomach twisted. His breath left him. A cold wind swept across the yard, though no breeze had blown the entire night. The flames shuddered, bending toward the box, as though bowing to it. He dropped the paper and stumbled back. Behind him, from beneath the ash, a child's whisper drifted up. You did not kill us, Elias Brant. We were already dead. The wind died. The fire hissed. The night closed in. Elias backed away until the tree-lean swallowed him whole. But the box remained untouched by flame. And beneath the settling ash, something inside it shifted, softly, almost tenderly. As though a child curled herself deeper into the dark. And waited. At the very edge of the silent woods, Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. Something told him the fire had not ended the story. It had only burned away the lies. If this tale haunts your waking hours, a whisper slipped through the branches behind him, subscribe your name to its shadow, and comment what the flames showed you. The woods swallowed the voice. The ruins smoldered. And beneath the ash, the Holloway child kept breathing.